Okay, Bitdefender, you fairly recently published your 2025 Cybersecurity Assessment Report. And I guess it'd just be good to understand a little bit about the sort of process and the thinking behind it before we then drill into, what it actually found out.
Yeah, I mean the process behind it's an interesting one. So we did a survey a while back. I believe it was back in 2023, and we basically wanted to see what's changed. So it was basically a big survey that looked at, I think, around 1,200 IT and security professionals. I think it was about 500 or slightly over 500 organizations in various industries. And we basically wanted to see kind of what's changed, what's happened. We looked at a number of different geographies from kind of European places, France, Germany, Italy, UK, whether that's European or not, and also a big focus on the US and Singapore. Given the recent acquisition that happened around 2 years ago, we've got quite a good kind of platform and footprint now in Southeast Asia. So that was a big part of it. But it was just to see what's changed. Obviously, the industry itself has gone through lots of change. Obviously, the rise of AI recently. So just trying to understand what the how mindset set has shifted at our clients and customers to understand what we need to kind of think about, what needs to be considered.
Okay, yeah, and in terms of the actual findings, there are quite a lot of interesting and sort of key issues brought up. I guess one of the ones that caught my eye at least was the fact that over half surveyed had been pressured in terms of staying silent when it comes to breaches. So, what's going on there, if you like?
Again, it's an interesting one. I think, again, I don't have the full report in front of me, but I know that the stats massively, I say massively varied, but it was still pretty much everyone was over 50%. I know there were some that were around 35, but I think Singapore had around 70, 75. The US was again over 70 from memory, and the UK was around 60. A lot of it, I think, is going to be driven by a disconnect. A lot of people not understanding kind of what's happening, where it's happening. And a lot of it is, I guess, purely the impact to an organization. If you think about the financial impact, the reputational impact, obviously, I don't want to kind of mention things that have happened recently or specific brand names, but if you look at some of the retail industry sector that's been hit in the UK, the financial impact to them, the regulatory impact potentially off the back of that, and then potentially the reputational damage in terms of customer loss and customer impact, customers going to different brands. So if you can hide something, I can understand why some organizations would. And I guess that's probably the strongest driver. The worry for me is the knock-on effect. Any organization that gets hit, if they keep it quiet, apart from obviously the financial damage and the reputational damage they'll be containing internally, if there's any third parties they work with where the knock-on effect could escalate and, essentially branch out to impact them as well. Organizations ideally should be, notifying their suppliers saying we've been hit. This could essentially extend to you potentially in the future, just making you aware of what's happened. So all of those are a concerning factor for us. But yeah, the number is astonishingly high, unfortunately.
And just on that reporting thing, I guess it probably does vary across the globe, but how much does legislation require folks to, inform people as to, because I think there's in parts of the world, at least there's rules that you're not supposed to, legally you're not supposed to pay ransomware, for example. I know that's slightly different, but is this an area where legislation potentially has a larger role to play, or is it very difficult to sort of tell enterprises what they can and can't do if they're trying to keep their businesses afloat, if you like?
Yeah, I mean, regulation's a massive part of it, whether it comes from, the GDPR reporting pieces. Obviously, you've got the recent introduction of DORA that came into effect at the beginning of the year. All of these have different levels of reporting in terms of timeframes. I guess the piece and again, to answer your question, yes, that has an impact, which is probably why some of the European cities are higher than others. I'm not sure in Singapore. I know there's a series of different frameworks like PDPA, which probably a mass TRM, which will have reporting guidelines. I guess the point is not everyone always, listens to regulations. And even if they said you have to report this, maybe the way that they've understood what's happened to us in terms of the incident, maybe it's not a severe incident. It couldn't be something that's impacted personal information, or the scope of that regulation doesn't impact these systems or this data that's been impacted. So some organizations will try and ring fence it and maybe, think that they don't have to report it. And similarly, some of the regions that we surveyed, the data may not completely align with, say, European regulation, maybe because of the industries that these are in. So, for example, DORA focuses on the financial institution majority, obviously some IT related industries that link towards that. However, if you don't sit within one of those industries that are highly regulated, then you won't fall part of that. So even though regulation within Europe, for example, is quite far ahead of a lot of other regions across the world, some of those regions, because of the industries that the organizations that have surveyed are in, therefore the numbers won't kind of correlate exactly. But I would definitely agree that it's got a big impact on it. But again, if we look at, off the top of my head, I think Singapore, UK, US were some of the top numbers in there in terms of percentages. And I think a lot of that comes down to the maturity of the market. A lot of the organizations there are more mature in the cybersecurity space. And maybe they understand the risk better than some of the other organizations in some of the other markets. So I think that also has a part to play.
Fair enough. And in terms of another finding that caught my eye, attack surface reduction is a top priority. Is that a change from what you've seen previously, or just a sort of a bigger focus on something that's already happening, if you like?
I think it's a bit of both. I think there's always been a perspective that has understood the risk around that and the importance of it. I think within the industry over the last kind of 10 years, maybe, everyone's always spoken about, you can't protect what you don't know about, whether it's, shadow IT, everyone's talking now about shadow AI. Unless you know that the asset exists, it's hard to protect it. And then when you do know about it, it's minimizing it as much as possible. I think over the last kind of year or 2 years, there's been more research to suggest, as well as a lot of the stuff that Bitdefender does, about the kind of living off the land attacks and how threat actors are utilizing native tools within organizations rather than bringing in malicious tools and malicious software. So the importance of it has maybe been heightened, but I think there's always been an awareness of it, but it's changed slightly, and organizations are trying to do more. So there's definitely been a shift, but I'd say a different shift. If you think about things like organizations in the past have been whitelisting applications, they've always been aware of the fact that we don't want employees to just download applications just willingly. So there's always been an understanding, but now it's going more granular and more understanding that it's not just about applications that are downloaded, but it's native technology that sits on the device. So again, I don't know if this is part of it, so excuse me, feel free to tell me not to talk about it. But Bitdefender recently launched a product called Phaser, which reduces the attack surface on a device by limiting native tools and technologies that, for example, an IT admin would use, but someone in HR or legal would never touch. So instead of it just being active and dormant on a device so that a threat actor could use it, there's technology now that can actually limit that and turn it off so someone can't use it if they gained access to the device, which again is technology that, 5-10 years ago was, it wasn't even considered, it wasn't around. So things are developing in that sense because of that. But there's been a high level understanding of it in the past.
Okay, and one thing that I funny enough, but I bumped into in other sort of surveys and stuff recently, the fact that the leadership seems to have a lot of confidence in their sort of cybersecurity strategy, but that doesn't seem to be borne out by the folks, if you like, at the coalface who's are less confident in what's going on. Yeah, just any thoughts as to why that might be, if you like.
Yeah, again, I think it was around 40-50% kind of was the C-level executives confidence level, and I think some of the mid-level managers was kind of 10-15-20% roughly. So yeah, big disconnect there. Again, I think it's one based on the fact that the C-level executives still don't fully understand security and the nuances, and some of that is because to some degree they shouldn't have to know all the technicalities, but it's maybe down to poor reporting or poor kind of board awareness and understanding. So there's a few different factors at play there. Again, if we take it down and think about a mid-level manager that's managing a cloud environment, they understand the gaps, they understand where they may be lacking, they may understand that maybe they haven't had budget to do pen testing for a while, they understand that these technologies are starting to use AI and adopt AI in different ways. The C-level executives know that over the last 2-3 years, we've been investing in cloud to try and secure it. And they may not understand that even though over the last 2-3 years we've made investments, there's been a number of changes that have happened and we've made no further investment. So there's a disconnect there where someone's going, we've done a lot, but there's still a lot to do. Whereas the C-level execs are saying, oh, we've done a lot. And maybe in comparison to some of our peers, we're actually quite far ahead. So there's always going to be a level where the C-level are going to be more confident because they're one step removed, and mid-level managers and anyone who's kind of operating on the BAU side, I think are always going to be more cautious because they're more technical, they're reading things in the news, they're fully aware of, essentially one vulnerability could be the be all and end all, and you're only as strong as your weakest link. So it doesn't take a lot for a breach to occur. And essentially at a C-level perspective, you're looking at, let's secure as much as we can and operating within that risk appetite and risk tolerance of an organization. Whereas the mid-level managers, I think, are way more, skeptical because they know that one gap is enough. So I don't think that disconnect's ever going to disappear, unfortunately.
And then we must come on. You've mentioned AI, I think already, but AI is obviously the flavour of the day. And in terms of what the report, I think is over two-thirds is it see a rise in AI-driven cyber attacks, and maybe related to that, AI-generated threats therefore are topping the list of business concerns. So, how big an issue is it? Bearing in mind, I guess that it's only, I won't say in its infancy, but it's still got a long way to go. So yeah, just your thoughts as to how much worse might it get before it maybe gets better?
So security in itself is always a cat and mouse industry. We're constantly, as much as Bitdefender and I'm sure other vendors are, trying to be proactive, and we're creating defenses against, for example, AI developed malware that currently hasn't even been seen in the wild. So we're doing things that maybe some other vendors are or aren't, I'm not sure, but we're trying to stay ahead of AI. But it's still predominantly and for the most part a cat and mouse industry. You can't protect what you don't know is damaged or weak or vulnerable. But the rise of AI-driven threats is an interesting one. We can understand why the numbers are increasing. The perceived piece, I think, is the most important part of that statement, because I believe, for example, if we look at phishing, there is going to be a lot more AI supporting the likes of a phishing attack, because in the past, where it was easy to spot them because of grammar or poor spelling or whatever it may have been, now it's extremely easy to craft a well-crafted email utilizing AI or an LLM to make sure that there is none of that in there. And now you can't spot a phishing attack based on that alone, whereas in the past it was very simple, very easy. Annoyingly, you still see some that do have poor grammar, and it's almost like, why have you not used an LLM? But that's a different story altogether. But we're not seeing as an organization, or we're seeing very little evidence of AI being used in a sophisticated manner to create malware. So we're not seeing some of the AI utilized in a way that I believe some organizations perceive it to be used. But we are seeing AI tools being used to refine, maybe troubleshoot malicious code. So it's not, you can't, for example, use AI to create malware from an end-to-end perspective, but maybe you've found some malware, you're trying to make some slight changes to it. You could maybe, use different prompts to troubleshoot why something's not working or improve something slightly, but it's not going to allow the likes of you or someone else on the high street to go online, use AI to create some really sophisticated malware that could then infiltrate an organization. So I think the perceived aspect is extremely important. Because I don't think it's truly where it could be. And I perceive, from my perspective, in the next 5 to 10 years, that could happen if LLMs or AI is not governed correctly. So, for example, I think when ChatGPT came out, you were able to ask it things that now you cannot, because they've put kind of ring fences and safeguards around it, which is extremely important. And if that doesn't change, or if people are able to build their own versions, then I perceive in the future that could be more of a concern, but I don't think it is yet. But again, hopefully, as I said, the likes of Bitdefender and other vendors can create, again, I don't know if you know, Bitdefender have created what we call an offensive and a defensive AI model in our own kind of organization, whereby we've created an AI that is creating malware, but we've also got a defensive AI model that is creating defenses for that. And by using that model, we're able to create defenses for stuff that is not currently seen in the wild, which is a good way to prepare. We may never see them. As I said, we may never ever see them. But if we do, we're ready for it. So yeah, I think, as I've said already, so I don't want to keep repeating myself, I think the really technically savvy things aren't there yet. But the perception is that there is. And the only thing that I say isn't an AI-driven cyber threat, but I think organizations are also thinking about it, is the point I made earlier about shadow AI. I think organizations, although it's not being used in a malicious way, I think a lot of organizations' employees are, I don't know, illegitimately is not the right word, but not in a governed way using these LLMs and ChatGPT services, AI services to, make their work more efficient, to improve. It could even be like an Excel formula or whatever it may be, just to query it because they think it's quicker. And unknowingly or unaware, they may be providing information that, could include personal information that is now sitting on a ChatGPT server somewhere. So I think that could be another risk that they're not necessarily understanding, but perceive as, and could be I don't want to say skewing these numbers, but maybe make the number higher than it maybe actually is in terms of a real AI-driven cyber threat.
Okay, and I guess the what's been covered by yourself so far is a sort of indication of the next bit, which is security solution complexity is a mounting challenge. So bearing in mind that you've described this landscape, all this going on, and I guess it's the types of the threats is one thing, but also I know people get frustrated because how many security solutions do you need, to put together to have a as comprehensive or optimized strategy as you can. I guess that's exercising people as well. So just your thoughts as to security solution complexity. Is it just a fact of life in today's cybersecurity world, or are there ways to at least optimize the number of solutions that can give you a good coverage?
I think it's a bit of both. I think it definitely is a byproduct of the market. Cybersecurity is huge. As we always say in the industry, there's no way for one person to know everything in security. It's just too broader knowledge base. It's a bit like being a lawyer. You're probably not going to know deep-rooted information about every single type of law. You mostly specialize in employment law, whatever it may be. And I think it's the same in security. And when you then think about the number of domains that are involved, the number of different security solutions that there are that tackle different siloed issues, is just going to exist. I was watching a video the other day of one of my colleagues who's a CISO of one of the vendors, and he was talking about the different GRC platforms, and just in GRC, so this is kind of almost like a small segment, it was like 6-7 different vendors he was talking about for different aspects of GRC. And I don't think many of them kind of cross the border to offer perspectives on both sides of the fence. So if you wanted a complete solution, you would probably need one of those, or one of each of those. So there is a lot of complexity there. There are some vendors that do kind of not blur the lines, but they are able to and offer services that can basically span across multiple domains. Again, a lot of these, if you look at any of the big players in any industry, they can maybe give you a flavor for different markets, but they don't necessarily go into as much detail in one area, or they don't give you the full breadth and feature set that you would like if you were to go for a vendor that only offered that. So there's always advantages and disadvantages. We personally, and I've been a consultant now for I think 13-14 years, we've always provided different services to help look at consolidation of solutions. So what are you using, what features are you maybe not using, maybe you've bought a solution from another vendor, why using that solution where you've got solution A over here that can also support that question and answer those questions. And it's assessing, does this solution offer something drastically different to this, or could you basically get rid of this and use one single platform? And a lot of vendors are looking into that. Bitdefender offer a host of different solutions to draw the lines from the EDR, XDR detection and response area, and then also kind of blur the lines with risk and compliance to try and give people a perspective there, because I think it's important. And people and organizations that are now struggling for budgets are looking for ways to consolidate vendors because it is extremely complex. And with your point before, is it just about that? It's not, whether there's different environments you've got to protect, which need different solutions, whether you've got internal skill shortages, which means you're going to need different solutions. It all comes together, and it's, if you don't have the relevant skills, if you've got multiple environments, what can you do? And the easiest solution is to buy a solution or buy a tool, and it gives you that perspective. And often, not all the time, but often it's cheaper than another individual. So instead of hiring someone to manage that platform, manage that environment that has the relevant skills, it sometimes can be cheaper to bring someone in, bring a solution in, and have someone have part of their role to manage that solution to give you the understanding, the visibility, clarity of that. So it's it's a really interesting piece. But I think with the increased, as you said before, compliance and regulatory environment, people are still looking at solutions. The problem being solutions or the tools, one, if there's numerous of them, consolidating them is important, but also having the right people to manage them. Yes, you don't need someone who's super technical, super skilled, because you are to some degree supplementing them with a tool. So you're giving them something to support them with, but they still need to be experienced enough and specialized enough to be able to understand what they want the tool to do, how they need to do, what they need to do with it. And to our point before about the knowledge gap and the gap between senior and management, you still need to be able to report on it. If you're using these tools and you're not utilizing them to their full potential, you're not reporting on the content up to the senior management team, essentially you're spending money for the sake of spending money. So it's a very, very complex environment, unfortunately.
Yeah, and you mentioned that I think about the skills issue, and there seems to be a growing skills gap, and that's I guess partly because people are disappearing from the industry, and partly because the whole subject is growing, so there's therefore more people needed. And then at the other end, perhaps of it is this job burnout. So just yeah, how you say obviously people to a certain extent can acquire solutions that can cover over to maybe skills shortages, but that's not entirely possible. So just how bad is it and could it be, do you think, in terms of both those aspects?
Yeah, I think again, off the top of my head, apologies, I don't have the report in front of me. I believe it said that most organizations thought that the skills gap and burnout had worsened over the last couple of years, which I don't disagree with. Again, I think over the last maybe 5, 10 years, it's been known as a problem. I haven't seen substantial changes really. Again, a lot of organizations are looking to bring different schemes in place to train up younger individuals, but I don't think the industry in itself has changed in any way. I've had a lot of discussions at different conferences with very senior people, CISOs at many organizations, and we think that the industry to some degree is not helping. We always ask for these certifications, and some of these certifications are extremely old, and the content they're trying to teach you is theoretical at best and very outdated. So if someone was to learn that, for example, who was entering the industry, it wouldn't help them in a day-to-day role within the industry. So we're kind of not helping ourselves there. But yeah, the skills gap I think is definitely an issue. Again, some specific aspects of the industry, if you look at operational technology, some SCADA systems, which are some technical operational type systems, which some of the older generation within the industry kind of grew up with, but the younger generation didn't. That skill is becoming far and few between, and less people have experience with it. And because a lot of organizations probably wouldn't implement some of that nowadays if they were to start up a new business, the gap is becoming worse for certain subject matters and subject knowledge areas. And burnout, again, we mentioned it briefly before, when organizations are suffering from a financial perspective, maybe they're investing in tools to try and minimize the investment in people, i.e. instead of growing a team of 10, you have a team of 3, and then you utilize different tools and solutions, maybe some external consultants and vendors. You're essentially putting a lot of pressure on a fewer number of people. So it does not surprise me. Again, with the increase in compliance and regulations, there's a lot more work to be done. A lot of it is, in my opinion, extremely beneficial, but can be seen as kind of red tape and evidence gathering for the sake of just complying to something, which again just puts added pressure. So it doesn't surprise me. I'm hoping it doesn't continue to get worse, and I'm hoping it continues to, increase in terms of decreasing skills gap, decreasing burnout, but an increase in benefit. But I'm not sure how quickly that will happen, to be honest. I think it needs a major shift, which we're not quite ready for yet as an industry.
Yeah, I mean, that maybe brings us on to maybe the conclusion seems to be that organizations, bearing in mind all we've talked about, need to adopt a more modern or a modern security strategy. We've got the AI, which, as you say, is a little bit unknown as to where it's going to go. We've got social engineering, which is getting more sophisticated, and just the speed of attack, I guess. So in practical terms, what can organizations do? I guess it's everything from sort of company culture through to deploying the right solutions. I mean, is there a sort of optimized strategy that you would, obviously individual companies might have slightly different needs, but fundamentally are there some basics that everyone should be doing to give themselves the best possible chance of resisting, combating the cybersecurity bad actors, if you like.
Yeah, I mean, we always talk about security being people, process, and technology. I think technology is seems to be the first thing organizations invest in. Obviously, we just mentioned if they have a small team and they're trying to, do something quickly, they invest in technology and tool sets. That obviously covers the technology piece, but the people and process are often what's left out. They don't train them, they don't look at them. So I think when people look to do what's right in security, it's getting all of the kind of foundational elements right. So all of the kind of basic IT hygiene, but then making sure that they're covering everything that isn't just technology. It's, the governance around everything, the policies and processes, making sure that they have an actual strategy that aligns with the business strategy, making sure that the people are well trained, that they don't hire people and essentially expect them to do loads of stuff or learn things on the job, but actually get them formal training to make sure that that skills gap doesn't worsen and that they don't feel like they're burnt out, and utilizing external specialists if they need the support. So for me, it's the kind of basic IT hygiene, getting everything like that completely sound from the start. It's easier to do it at the beginning than kind of retrofit anything like that in at the end. Having an organization understand, and again, I know you said everyone's different, and this point kind of talks to that a bit, but if an organization hasn't done a lot, the thing you need to consider is, if we had an incident tomorrow, what would we do? So I think making sure organizations have cyber insurance, making sure they have a technology like Bitdefender's detection and response technology is important, because if you don't have those policies, you don't have those procedures, you have poor basic IT hygiene, you're more likely to have an incident. Therefore, I would focus more on the response and the recovery elements, because in reality, you could have an incident tomorrow, you could have an incident next month, so you don't necessarily have the time and the benefit to do everything at the beginning. So I think a lot of organizations need to look to that. And if they don't have the internal skill sets, if they don't have a big team, which a lot of organizations don't, make use of external MDR providers. They're 24/7 providers that can, detect and respond incidents for you. They take a lot of the pain away, and allow you to focus on some of those more proactive, preemptive things like strategies, making sure it aligns with the business, making sure everyone's trained up, making sure that all the basic IT hygiene is also taken care of. Again, in the UK, Cyber Essentials, I think, as much as I don't believe if you are Cyber Essentials certified, you will be completely secure, but it gives you a nice baseline of best practice of the IT hygiene pieces that we I've mentioned. An organization should definitely look at, but don't get that and think that I'm fine. You then need to look at the people, processes, and other elements as well.
Okay, that's brilliant. Maybe just one final thing, and it's perhaps a little bit unfair, bearing in mind what you said earlier, but in terms of AI, which clearly is the the big topic, do you think, and you explained obviously it's a sort of cat and mouse game, security anyway, do you think AI, the advantages for the bad actors will outweigh what folks like yourselves can do with it, or do you think it'll be a sort of neutral sum game, or yeah, just your thoughts as to how that AI will be used?
I don't think there'll be a massive, I don't know if it'll be neutral, but I don't think there'll be any kind of huge gain on either side. I think bad actors can obviously utilize it, as we've seen, but I think, as I said earlier, Bitdefender since 2008 have been using AI. We've created essentially triggers for malware and indicators for malware that have not been seen in the wild yet. So we're utilizing it and hopefully preparing for an eventuality that maybe never happens, but if it does, because of the use of AI, we're already ahead of it. So there's ways that it can be used that can benefit us arguably more than them, and we can prepare ahead of time. Likewise, outside the security industry, AI can be used for so many things that speed up so many different aspects. And I think it's all too easy to focus on the negatives and the bad stuff that it can be used for. Whereas I think if people embrace it, as they hopefully should, in a secure way, don't get me wrong. Again, there's different standards like ISO 42001 that talks about the implementation of AI management systems. I think if people do things the correct way and understand the risk, then I think it could be a lot better for us as a globe to implement it and utilize it for the good and for the better. But it will be used, I'm sure, for negative reasons. There's no doubt in my mind. But I don't think it will massively outweigh if people utilize it and prepare the same way that Bitdefender is.
Okay, it's been great to chat and you shared some brilliant insights into obviously the report and your thoughts more generally as to what's going on in the cybersecurity space. So, Nick, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.